Hi, I'm Jennifer Isabella.
And I'm Stephanie Baloris.
Your co-host for Forrester's podcast, What It Means, where we explore the latest market dynamics impacting executives and their customers. Today, we're joined by Vice Presidents and Principal Analysts Diego Lo Giudice and Mike Gualtieri to discuss the pros and cons of Turing bots. Welcome both.
Thank you very much. It's great to be here.
Thank you. Good to be here.
So let's just level set a little bit. Can you both define what Turing bots are, where the name came from? I hear there's a little backstory to that.
Yeah, I'll start with that. I want to make a little bit of a quick history on how we got to that. And so in 2016, we published our first piece around how AI will change software development and applications. In 2019, another piece around, again, how AI would influence and change the way we test, the path to autonomous testing, augment testers first. These were the first two reports, germinal to in 2020, when Mike came around in an internal application development and delivery team meeting with this idea around Turing bots. And I jumped on the idea, said, Mike, this is great. I think this is happening. And so we started writing predictions in 2020, 2021, and in 2022, end of last year, Turing bots basically became one of the top 10 technology trends. And we wrote our first piece that was not just a blog or a prediction, where basically we describe what Turing bots are, and titled "Offer a Peek into Next Generation Development." So what Turing bots are, basically it's AI applications, AI systems that can be, that will support developers and development teams during various stages of the software development lifecycle, from analysis, design, development, testing, deployment, and collaboration among the developers. Turing bots basically in each one of those stages augment what developers and developer teams can do.
Yeah, and the name Turing bot, which we came up with, was basically a shout out to Alan Turing, the great computer scientist in the past. And to be clear, Diego is in the application development team. He covers application development. I cover AI in our data and insights group. And there was something bubbling up in AI with deep learning that was very interesting. And there was also this concept called AutoML in data science, which automated some elements of the life cycle as well. So when we started to look, we said, well, could this apply to other disciplines within the development area? And sure enough, Diego had written about this prior for testing, and we just kind of extended it to development. And we felt very confident that maybe all of the technologies weren't quite there, but the trajectory of the AI technologies were going to bring us to this point that we are today, which is Turing bots are a reality.
So when we talk about the advantages in the development lifecycle, how significant are the advantages? I don't know if you have any potential examples at different stages. So from the beginning.
The first thing to remind everyone, the world spends trillions of dollars on software development per year, right? So when you're spending trillions of dollars on something, tiny little percentages of productivity, translate to huge dollars for organizations. So when we talk about Turing bots, that's kind of the scale we're talking about. We're talking about, can we improve a developer's and a development team productivity incrementally, even by a few percentage points? We would have, huge productivity gains in the teams. And it's not necessarily just productivity. We'll probably talk later about the quality and some other aspects that I think Diego in particular has some insights that he can bring to this, first from testing and the productivity that AI application development testing brings, and then extending into application development.
Yeah, so I think it's very interesting how You're right, Steph, that at each stage of the development life cycle today, we've got different levels of productivity for two reasons. One, because of the technology maturity stages, right? AI is maturing in many areas, more in some and less than in others, or slower in others. And so we'll see a different impact. Now, today everybody is very excited about code generation, that you ask chat gpt, you give it a statement and it will write the code for you, and we all get very excited because it does so very quickly, and it can help your productivity. And in that stage of coding, maybe it will increase the productivity to 40-50%, but that's only a step in the whole life cycle of software development, where more time is spent on understanding what we need to build, designing it, testing it, writing the code, deployment. So the big the big productivity gains and the benefits are going to come and are going to become much bigger as Turing bots mature also in these other stages. As I said, the coding one is very exciting right now. Everybody is very excited about that. But in other areas as well, like analysis, in the analysis and design stage, you've got things like Microsoft Sketch 2 code, right? Vision is very strong. AI is very mature in vision. So now you can draw a user interface literally on the board, and you can have a team that is experimenting with Sketch 2 code. It will generate the HTML code for you very quickly so think how that will change the way we work, right? You go to testing. Mike mentioned testing. Yes, testing, and it's not just in the automation or increasing the level of automation of tests, because today we spend a lot of time testing manually. So improving the automation is one big advantage. But where AI is really helping in the testing space is optimizing tests. What are the right tests that I should spend time on? Which tests should I execute based on a change, rather than executing all the battery of tests and spending a lot of time and money on the execution of thousands of tests that maybe don't have an impact on the change that you just made in the code. Doesn't have an impact on that. Self-healing. We waste a lot of time when we get a bug. We don't know if the bug is the code, or was it because the test was broken because there was a change in the user interface. So now AI is used to self-heal. It's able to figure out that, hey, this is still a button. It's the same button you had a minute ago. It moved a little bit. So it has a new URL. It's got a new locator. And because it learned and it was trained on how user interfaces work, it's able to kind of guess that that's still a button, but it's just in a new position, so the test won't fail.
Yeah, I think a simple way to think of this is like 70s and 80s and 60s, I suppose, as well, right? If you're a developer and you needed to know how to do something, you'd have manuals. You'd thumb through a manual, or you'd look through some textbooks by Donald Knuth, perhaps. And then when the internet came, you'd search for code samples, right? You'd say, well, I'm trying to do this. And then you'd do a search, and then you'd see this code sample. And now with Turing bots, you say, you don't search for code samples. You don't look in a book. You just say, write me some code that will connect to, MongoDB and put something on a Kafka queue, type of thing, right? So that's kind of where we're at now. That's huge. I mean, it's a progression, and it's a big difference. And Diego is providing insight into the next progression, which is, here's a design. Here are user requirements. Build me an application under these architectural constraints. So super exciting.
So we talked to, productivity increases. Biggest thing could actually be quality itself. One thing I'm curious about is, does it have the ability to potentially improve the inherent security of code as well? Like actually designing more secure code from the outset, and more secure applications, more secure software.
That is another area. One is the code quality improvement that these bots can bring, right? Eliminating a lot of the false positive and false negatives that many of the tools do. And you used to have a staff of people that were doing things in the back room to find out, what changed, what new breaches were happening in the market. And now that activity is taken over, is slowly moving into using machine learning models. Some of the security vendors are already starting to announce introduction and infusion of AI in that space too, in the security space. I think, though, that when you look at overall code writing, at the end of the day, today, the level of maturity from what I've seen in talking to developers and even some of the providers and vendors that are working in this space is still Turing bots are better off being used by expert developers, the ones that deploy code, that write code. They're very helpful and they make much more productive a senior and skilled developer at this point. And the code that is written is judged by these senior developers on how good the code might be, and if there are better ways to write it. You can ask the Turing bot to some of these Turing bots like Copilot. You can ask it to provide a better version or an improved version of the same code, and it will do that.
I don't think that it's completely there yet. Like, you're not going to be able to totally trust. Like, you're not going to be able to say, "Oh, write me some secure code," and totally trust that at this point. But it brings up another question too, because in the original paper that Forrester published, we also said things about, well, because there's trade-offs too. Like, do we want latency? Do we want throughput? Do we want performance? So that brings it to a whole new level too, where you can start specifying what sort of the architectural requirements are as well. Do we want it to run in cloud? Do we want it on-prem? Do we want it to be a hybrid architecture? So when it starts designing it in a much larger way, there's many different constraints and trade-offs that we think ultimately it will be able to handle as well.
Yeah, so I think what I was just trying to differentiate is one thing when you look at the coding Turing bot that writes code for you, right? And what is the level of security? And another thing is the security tools. Just as we were talking about testing being enhanced with AI, the current security tools are also being enhanced with AI to do a better job in the security space as well. And so therefore in the tester Turing bot space and in the coding Turing bot space, you're already seeing products that are doing both code generation, but also helping you focus on some security aspects of the code and even finding bugs, supporting you finding bugs to help write better code. So we have to look at this from the two sides. One is, how do the Turing bots help the tools that we use to build software, to build applications, and also on when you look at the code writing of these Turing bots, security at the level of the code that is produced and the maturity of that code, which needs still supervision by expert developers in today.
This might get a little bit into the weeds, but I'm curious about how you actually deploy the technology. Does it integrate into the developer experience? Like, is it how seamless is it, or how kludgy is it? Because you mentioned it's really best suited for more advanced developers.
Well, we have a couple of examples, and how this is going to play out is a different story, which I don't think we know for sure yet. So if you look at using something like GitHub Copilot or Amazon Whisper or Tab9, these are integrated into the IDE. You're in your IDE, you're writing your code, and instead of, as Mike said, there's think of you're building a cloud native application on AWS S3, got hundreds of APIs that the developer doesn't remember. Instead of looking up documentation, it can ask the question inside the IDE about, I want to write, I want to access and create a piece of storage that I need to access on S3, and the code Turing, the Copilot will generate that code. Will show first of all what that signature looks like, what parameters, and if you want, it will generate the code for you. So 5, 6, 10 lines of code inside the IDE, right? But if you think about ChatGPT now, it has a different you use it in a different way, right? It's a chat. It's like having a chatbot, a chat exchange experience where you're writing and you tell it, I want to build a user interface in Python that has 3 fields, red color background, and enters login, and boom, it will generate the code. You're not in an IDE now, right? You're outside of the IDE in this case. The tester Turing bots get integrated into the testing tools, right? So inside the traditional software testing tool that we've been using, now the vendors have included a test, Turing bot capabilities inside the tool itself. I think the question on the future is, are we going to have, really just a Turing bot in each one of these space, or some of the Turing bots are starting to cross, right? I mean, if you Chat GPT does both a couple of things. It generates code, but it also does unit testing, just as Copilot does as well. So it generates code, and you can also generate and test within the same environment.
I think the difference, though, is that the scope is still small.
Yes, few lines of code.
These current tools do, right? And when we first wrote that paper in 2020, the vision there was that there would be some sort of standardized way to define business requirements, a standardized way to define architectural requirements, and then because take a large bank, which has a portfolio of hundreds of different applications that interact with each other and have data sources. Well, if you're really going to do something new and interesting in a large scale, the Turing bot has to understand that environment too to make the best decisions. So where we are right now is that the Turing bots that Diego's talking about, they read a whole bunch of code that exists, that's out there, right? But a future Turing bot will have that, but it will also, you probably press a button, you say, look at my environment. Look at the code in my environment, so that it can even have solutions that are more finely tuned and make sense and are optimized for that bank, that insurance company, that large global organization.
What's the sentiment around this from the developer perspective? Is there, fervor here, or is there a sort of fear of the unknown, a combination of both?
So what's the sentiment? I think so. There is always, just as there is for AI, there's a little bit of fear. Some folks might think, "Oh, AI is going to is going to take my job away," right? If AI builds the code, what am I going to do? All the code, but we're far from that, and when we don't see that happening yet. There are some initial studies done by universities, sponsored by vendors as well. GitHub did one when they launched Copilot, a very interesting survey. And also the feedback I got from some very senior developers that I reached out to directly. And there's actually a very positive sentiment because, as Mike mentioned, when you build code, there is a lot of there is a lot of work that you need to do that is besides writing the business logic. It's setting up the environment, it's configuring things, there's a lot of creation of, let's say, artifacts that you have to build, and that you have to code, writing the tool that you have to remember. So the developers that have used at least the coding Turing bot, right? I'm talking specifically about the coding Turing bot, which has maybe the most direct impact on developers, is that it actually is freeing up their time. It's taking over all that low hanging but intellectually heavy work that they need to do to remember things and write things up. The Turing bot is and generating that code for them, right? Even in the DevOps space, there's Turing bots for delivery that will basically do all that work for the developer, leaving the developer the time to focus on the real stuff, and making it much more productive. So the sentiment and the data that they got, the satisfaction and well-being, is that they are less frustrated when coding. They feel more fulfilled with the job of writing code. They focus on more satisfying work, right? So, and the percentages were quite high. There were about 50, 60% of those that used that were sampled in the study.
I think Diego's right in, citing those studies. So yes, they'll be more satisfied, but it'll be the 50 that are left out of the team of 100. So, but I don't think it's going to be a cataclysmic job loss. It's going to be so gradual that, it's going to be like the typewriter to the computer. It's going to be so gradual that it will have more to do with the market dynamics of skill sets than it will, like, oh, we're going to, now we don't need, half of our people. But that's the magnitude of this.
I'm curious what the business sentiment is. I mean, I imagine the business is obviously very interested in improving productivity, reducing costs, and most importantly, getting new software and applications to market as quickly as possible, and the release cycles and the creativity in the engagement models. But I'm also curious, and I can't remember if it was Mike or Diego actually used the word trust. How much does the business actually trust the output right now? Because it's so early.
Well, they probably do more than they probably trust it more, like from a business person's perspective that maybe doesn't understand everything about it, but like the idea of developing software faster and getting more done with the same teams that they have. They probably are too trusting of it, of the capability of it, because this is not fully baked, fully developed. This is still very early. So I think, as Diego pointed out, you definitely need at this point professional, experienced developers, at least on the team using these. So the business can't get too over exuberant on okay, how can we use this right now, and now we want to double the output of our development teams. But I think the business people are positive towards this technology, but it might put a little pressure on the development team that's unwarranted. Like, okay, now you should be able to do a lot more. I don't think that's going to happen, and immediately, right? Because teams have to understand how to fully incorporate this, identify what risks may exist, and that sort of thing.
I'm curious, do we have any early examples of software or applications or portions of software applications that have actually been either co-developed or tested and actually are in production in the real world?
So in the testing space, yes, because this is, as I said, I mean, the first time I wrote the report was 2019. When I wrote that report, where I got the examples was, so it first was leveraged and experimented on projects with clients by system integrators. Right now, the reason why system integrators played a big role, service companies, is because testing was and used to be and still is a huge test service market. So the service providers were already leveraging in 2019. That's where I got a lot of the use cases. The tool vendors were slower in incorporating, actually. So at that time, there were projects going on with clients, and in the last 3 years now, the technology has moved into the tools. Right? I mean, system integrators always find the white space where the tools are lacking, but now the tools are starting to incorporate them. So self-healing, improving the automation, tools like Apply Tools is used by many enterprises to test very quickly changes in the browsers. Think about somebody that has 3,000 pages. They make a change on let's say just even just their brand name, right? The logo. How do you test 3,000 pages to find that the logo is rendering correctly? I mean, manually it would take a lot of time. Now it's done in seconds through Apply Tools, which uses AI, is using vision system, deep learning algorithms, right? So in the testing space, more mature. In the Turing bot coder, let's say, I think we're a bit more behind, but there are still some very good numbers out there. Tab9, which is one of the leading software houses that basically is a coding Turing bot, about a year and a half ago claimed they had about more than 1.5% of the code was in the world was written and generated through Tab9. Now, if you multiply that, that was like 2 years ago. you multiply that and you add to that the code that is generated in the testing space. That's how we got to the prediction that 10% of the code worldwide is written today already by Turing bots, and that will increase going forward.
If you actually look at too, I don't think it's hard to project what this could be, because if you actually sit down with the developer and you see what they're doing, a lot of it is what I call plumbing or wiring, right? And Diego alluded to this as well, right? It's like you're not like being super creative. You have to be super creative in one aspect, but you're given these requirements. It's like, well, there's an API over here that has to pass data here, that has to pass. So there's a lot of wiring and plumbing that goes into it. And I can't see any reason why Turing bots couldn't handle most of that part of it. And we think 80% of a developer's time is wiring and plumbing. So, I mean, even if it's 40, 50%, I mean, it's huge. It will be huge.
So how do companies today get started? Because right now we said that there's no end-to-end Turing bot solution for the entire development lifecycle. We've got Turing bots at specific phases and for specific pieces that are very effective. So if an organization wants to get started, where do they start? Are they focusing on a specific use case of applications, or are they targeting a specific phase of the development lifecycle?
So I think the first thing is I think the organizations need to make sure they understand where this is in terms of maturity, in terms of risk. There's implementation that they can do with some of the Turing bots. I think the testing Turing bots, there's various use cases that can be leveraged already today. In the coding Turing bot, it's more experimentation, because these are really newer than the tester, because Copilot was basically in a developer trial for about a year, and now they just released a business version a month ago. Amazon announced end of last year. So we're going to start to see more interest around, your question around business is on spot on, because now business are going to say, oh, but we can start using these things maybe, right? And what we think as Forrester, think about how long it's going to take for organizations first to get over the concerns about, well, can we trust this? Is this developers and users? Is this going to jeopardize my job? And find the right practices and governance to start adopting them. That's going to take time, right? It's not going to happen in 6 months, a year. And at the same time, the technology is maturing, right? And has to mature more.
One of the thought is, and you appreciate all the cautions around the governance, the policy, the risk management. I also wondered to some extent that if you don't start experimenting with it, at least with some sort of center of excellence or centralized team, do you leave it to chance that some product team with their own developers gets excited and decides to go ahead and beat you to it?
Shadow IT 2.0 or 3.0?
I guess that's a good point, right? That's what you urge organizations to come up quick, fast enough to with governance rules, with policies, and with an experimentation program, at least in some areas. So, is there a change in skills needed in the roles, right? So this is next generation development. And the answer is, well, there are some things that are quite clear changing. One is, if you think about ChatGPT, many people will try ChatGPT and will prompt it to fail because they want to prove out this thing is not smart enough. I asked it that question and it got it wrong, right? But if you actually prompt GPT in the right way, you can get really some good things out of it. And this is in general valid as well, but in our area, in the development and design, in the development space, is true too. So one new skill or role will be the design and the requirements phase of what we're used to do is going to change. It's going to be more prompting, right? It's some form of prompt engineering that a designer, that in the design stage, we will have to do. If you don't ask ChatGPT the right question, you won't get the right answers out, right? So these Turing bots, as all AI is, it's garbage in, garbage out. And so therefore, we're going to have to think about in enterprises skills around asking the right questions and thinking about what you can really ask the Turing bot to be more effective, and how we prompt the Turing bots, right? That's kind of in the analysis design phase is going to change, is kind of a new way of working in building the software, where effective prompting becomes very relevant as a skill.
Thank you both for joining us today.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you, Jen.
If you like what you heard today, subscribe to Forrester's What It Means podcast on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, or your favorite podcast player. To continue the conversation, follow Forrester on Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn, or drop us a note at podcast@forrester.com. Thanks for listening.